And we are live. Hello, YouTube. Hello, everybody who's decided to join today. Um, I can already see some familiar faces in the chat, so that's great to see. I've been going live on a monthly basis for members of World Astrology Report, but there is a lot of crazy stuff happening right now. So I thought, why not go live again and just make it available to everyone? So here I am. I'm here to talk about the big UFO flap that seems to be happening right now. And I have a bit of a presentation for you. So without further ado, let's get into this. All right. So astrology, UFOs, and nukes. This is a thumbnail from a video I put out quite a while ago now on the subject of astrology and UFOs and nukes, and how how the themes of UFOs and nuclear weapons seem to be joined together, and astrology seems to show that they're joined together because they're both following similar cycles, these themes. Um, so I go into this subject in a bit of more depth in that video. I recommend you checking it out if you haven't seen it before. But I'm going to go through some of that material in this presentation. So, order of business, what are we going to do today in this stream? So, first of all, we're going to have a little roundup on what's happening. Then we're going to think about why is it happening now? And this is where we're going to bring astrology into this. Then we're going to think a bit about how we should be thinking about what's happening. What does it mean? What takeaways are there? And then I'll take a couple of questions from you at the end as well. So if you have any questions that occur to you as the stream is going on, then please just put them in the chat and I will pick a couple of them at the end to answer for you. All right. Now, first of all, before we really get into this, something I want to say about the UFO phenomenon is that both of these things probably exist. There's the phenomenon itself, whatever it may be, and then there's human imitation or recreation of its technology or of the phenomenon. So it seems quite likely that there is this thing called the UFO phenomenon. We don't know for sure what it is. There are lots of theories, and we'll look at some of those later on in this presentation. But there is this strange thing that happens with these strange lights in the sky that seem to be able to move at great speed. We have all these other aspects, contact with beings, etc. And there are so many reports of this kind of thing happening, so many credible reports. In my opinion, it's pretty much undeniable that the phenomenon is real. But at the same time, we also, I think, can be quite confident that militaries have been working on technology either to imitate what UFOs seem to be able to do, or perhaps even deconstructing recovered craft and these things that you tend to hear. So bear in mind that these two things probably both exist, and just have that factored in when you think about this phenomenon. Now, there is a huge UFO flap underway right now. If you're on UFO Twitter, you'll have seen that there are tons of videos being posted right now from different places in the world of sightings of craft in the sky. Um, I've been on UFO Twitter for quite a while. I haven't seen anything like this. There really does seem to be something happening. Now, what it is, we can't be sure, but there are tons of sightings being reported. I've just clipped some tweets here. There were multiple UAPs, or as they're called now, but UFOs seen in Arizona last night. There's another video doing the rounds that supposedly shows UFOs in Moscow, Russia, um, and there have been sightings at a nuclear facility in North Carolina, Duke Energy's nuclear plant, in the last few days. And there have also been sightings supposedly over Washington, D.C. Now, on the left-hand side of this picture, of this screen, you can see this picture here with the Capitol building, and there are 4 lights above the Capitol building in the sky there. Now, there's also this video doing the round, which is purporting to show UFOs or UAPs, some sort of kind of lights in the sky over Washington, D.C. These are all from the last couple of days, supposedly. And it's all very reminiscent of this incident in 1952, which resulted in this cartoon being drawn, this famous cartoon entitled Saucers over Washington, D.C., showing all these lights that were supposedly seen around the Capitol building. I think it was 2 weekends in a row. There were lots of sightings, lots of eyewitnesses. 1952, and what's being reported right now is weirdly reminiscent of that. But, and there's often a but where the UFO phenomenon is concerned, this picture that I just showed you has already been debunked. So you can see on the left we have these 4 lights. They're in a kind of trapezoid shape, but these 4 lights here. And then on the right, we can see that there are, in the same picture, there are 4 street lamps, which are, if you look, they're actually configured in the exact same way. They're just flipped vertically. So this is clearly some kind of lens effect. It's not an actual picture of UFOs. And it's pretty interesting that we're also seeing kind of fake, easily debunked material coming out at the same time as some more credible stuff is happening. That clues us into the hall of mirrors that the UFO subject area really is. It's subject to a lot of deception. Um, this book by Jacques Vallée, Revelations, Alien Contact and Human Deception, is really worth a read if you're getting deeper into this subject. And in this book, Jacques Vallée, who's obviously a very famous ufologist, he talks about the aspect of the phenomenon that is clearly generated by human deception. He documents a lot of cases which seem to have clearly been the result of deliberate manipulation or fabrication by hidden parties, probably intelligence agencies and so forth, either trying to sort of muddy the water and confuse people or make the whole UFO field seem less credible, or sometimes it's like to kind of put people off the scent, or experiment and see how people seem to be affected by these events and these strange stories. There are lots of examples of this, and it really does clue us into the fact that we need to be really careful with this issue because it's subject to a lot of manipulation. As I said earlier, I think there's a real phenomenon. Then there are human technology which is imitating the phenomenon, but there's probably also just kind of psychological operations, hoaxes, etc. as well. All of these things are mixed in, so we need to be very careful about what we believe about what's going on in general with the UFO phenomenon and what's going on right now. But the main course, in my opinion, is these so-called unauthorized or mystery drones that are apparently plaguing US Air Force bases in the UK right now, particularly at 3 RAF sites in southeast England, where there have been tons of sightings of these supposedly what's been described as mystery drones. It's very weird, mystery drones. Um, these things are seemingly operating with impunity over like very sensitive military sites, and it's all a bit strange. Ross Coulthart is a Australian journalist who has dug into this subject quite a lot from a kind of defense sort of military intelligence perspective, admittedly, but he has done quite a lot of reporting on the subject. He's been on News Nation, which is the channel he works for recently, talking about these events in England. And you can find this interview on the internet. It's just 5 minutes long, but he makes a few interesting points about what's going on. Firstly, he says that these bases where these strange drones are being seen are very likely to store nuclear weapons, according to him. He seems to be, he says we should be skeptical that they are actually drones. He says that there's no proof that's been presented by the military that they're drones. There's been no attempt to shoot them down. And you have to ask, why not? Isn't that strange that say these are just drones, that they're being allowed to operate in the skies over extremely sensitive military facilities that very likely have nuclear weapons in them? It just seems extremely unlikely. You'd have thought that the US military, the UK military, would have pretty effective weapons or tools to deal with this kind of thing if they are indeed drones. And it's not just the UK, and it's not just right now. I mentioned this story in one of my videos recently, entitled "Mystery Drones Swamped a US Military Base for 17 Days. The Pentagon is Stumped." US officials don't know who is behind the drones that have flown unhindered over sensitive national security sites or how to stop them. This appeared in the Wall Street Journal in October. And this is a story in the New York Post on the same events, saying, headlined, "UFO drones are surveilling America's most sensitive military sites, and the Pentagon says it can't stop them." Fleets of dozens of mysterious UFO drones are surveilling America's most sensitive military sites, and the Pentagon admits it can't do much to stop the aerial intruders, according to a new report. It's very strange that they're referring to these things as UFO drones. I guess they are literally unidentified flying objects, but there doesn't seem to be any proof that they are drones. And again, there's a lot of skepticism, particularly among ufologists, that these really are drones. If you could imagine if strange objects were being sighted over sensitive military sites, saying that they're drones is quite a good cover story, especially because considering that probably members of the public can also see these objects. So this seems to be, I mean, it could be a a very obvious cover story for the possibility that strange objects are suddenly being seen all over these military sites. Now, we shouldn't jump to conclusions, but it's very, very fishy, in my opinion. Now, at the same time as all this is happening, we've got this big escalation in Ukraine, which has happened over the recent weeks. I've just taken some headlines here about what's happened there. Um, Essentially, the West, by the Biden administration, followed by the UK, has given Ukraine permission to use long-range missiles, which can fire deep into Russia, which is something that the Russians have been saying. If you do this, we consider that we're essentially at war with NATO. They argue that these long-range weapons, these high-tech missiles, would need teams like Americans, Brits, or whoever to actually operate them, since they're complicated or whatever. So um, this was something that the Russians were warning about. This is going to be a huge escalation. It's just happened. So we have these headlines: Putin fine-tunes Russia's nuclear doctrine after Biden's arms decision on Ukraine in clear signal to West. With use of new missile, Russia sends a threatening message to the West. The intermediate range missile did not carry nuclear weapons, but it is part of a strategic arsenal that is capable of delivering them. So we just saw that in response to this permission to the Ukrainians, the Russians deployed this new hypersonic missile called the Oreshnik. There's this quite crazy video out there showing this thing. It seems to be it's like a missile that can launch multiple warheads very quickly. And there's a video out there showing this weapon being used on Dnipro, which is a city in Ukraine. Another headline here, just to illustrate the climate: nuclear bomb map shows impact of Russian weapons on major US cities. This is the kind of thing that we're seeing in the media right now. So it does look like the threat of nuclear weapons being used has raised higher than it has been for quite a long time, and it's coming at exactly the same time as all these objects are supposedly being seen over sites which Ross Coulthard says are nuclear weapon storage sites. So what we seem to be seeing here is the confluence of the themes of UFOs and nukes. And this is something that's documented in the UFO literature, particularly in this book, UFOs and Nukes by Robert Hastings, where this researcher, he's interviewed hundreds of former military personnel in the US about reports of UFOs appearing at nuclear sites. And there are tons and tons of stories about this. The picture that I've just clipped here, this is from a video that you can find on the net. I think it's just some sort of fabricated simulation video, but it shows a missile moving very fast and then a UFO flying around it and firing beams at it. I doubt this is a real video of this incident, but supposedly something like this did happen. And there are tons of stories of UFOs kind of apparently appearing at nuclear sites, switching the missiles off, switching them on, doing all sorts of stuff, going back quite a long way. So the astrology now, why is this happening now? This is what astrology can at least contribute to this this whole narrative and this whole story. I've done a few videos on the intersection between well, astrology and the UFO phenomenon. One of them I mentioned at the start, astrology, UFOs and nukes. I did one more recently, just with this sort of rather provocative thumbnail, but saying that they're coming. But essentially, this was about the Saturn-Neptune cycle, and I'm going to just round up some of the astrology. Like, why is this happening now of all times? And there are multiple factors that are lining up that tell us, like, why are we seeing this right now? And the first of them is Pluto in Aquarius. As I'm sure most of you know, Pluto moved into Aquarius for the third and final time on November the 19th. So Pluto is now in Aquarius. It won't be going back into Capricorn, and it will be spending 20 years in that sign. Pluto, among other things, is a planet of power. It's one of its core significations. Now, Aquarius, one of its core meanings is the theme of the stranger or the outsider, the Aquarian outsider. So one of many ways you can delineate Pluto in Aquarius is the power of the stranger. Very simple. And if we look at previous Pluto-Aquarian transits, previous times that Pluto was in Aquarius, going back 800 years, we see that over and over again there's this theme of the sort of the revelation of powerful strangers. It goes back through history. So if we go back to 1286 to 1308, which is a Pluto in Aquarius transit, this was the time of Marco Polo. Now, Marco Polo at this time was, or journeyed from Venice to China, to the Yuan Mongol dynasty of the time, came back to Europe, wrote his book, The Travels of Marco Polo, about this wondrous civilization that he'd visited at the other end of the Eurasian landmass. So there was this revelation to the Europeans, and probably also to the Chinese, because Polo visited them, that there existed this other very powerful civilization at the other end of the world. So this really set, I'd say, European imagination alight to an extent, and a lot followed on from that. Having once they'd realised that there were these, there were other civilizations to trade with, and so forth, it kind of stimulated the exploration that came further down the line. If you go to the next Pluto in Aquarius transit, 1532 to 1554, we at this time saw the Spanish conquistadors in Latin America, particularly the conquistador Pizarro, who overthrew the Inca emperor Atahualpa at this time. So once again, we have these strangers appearing in Peru from the other side, from across the ocean, and this civilization, the Inca civilization, which presumably hadn't known that this power had existed, that they hadn't known about Europe. Suddenly, these powerful strangers show up and completely upend their civilization. And then if we go to the last Pluto in Aquarius transit, 1777 to 1798, this picture here shows what was called the McCartney Embassy. This was the meeting between, or the first meeting between the British Empire and the Chinese Empire of the time. So once again, we see the same theme again. We see these civilizations which haven't had any contact with each other suddenly coming into contact. So it's something that we see over and over again with Pluto in Aquarius. And one of the possibilities, of course, is in today's world, when we think we know who's on the planet, the revelation that there are actually other powers present. And again, sort of at this stage in history, what could that mean? We're not going to find another continent at this time. So the revelation of other non-human intelligences clearly fits with history, even though we've never seen anything quite so wild as that before. Okay, second factor that's also pointing to this, the sextile between Pluto and Neptune. Now you can see, actually, I've shown where the planets are now. We have Pluto in Aquarius. It's just entered the sign of Aquarius. And then we have Neptune in late Pisces. So these two planets are already in a sextile. Obviously, it's going to get closer and closer, but they're well within orb of sextile right now. So these two very powerful planets are speaking to each other. Now, we need to go back to the conjunction of these planets to understand what their cycle is doing. So we had 3 conjunctions of Pluto and Neptune in 1891 and 1892 in around 8 degrees of Gemini, the sign of the twins. Now, as I've said in previous videos, one of the major things that happened at this time, particularly that's relevant to what we're talking about today, is the sightings of the so-called mystery airships. In 1896, 1897, there was this huge wave of sightings of airships across the US and then across the world. All these strange, very fast-moving airships were seen all over the place. At this time, airships didn't really exist; they weren't really a thing, and yet somehow people were seeing these things, and they were moving very quickly. They had very strong spotlights. They were doing a lot of the things that UFOs do. That's how Jacques Vallée has described these airships. So they had very impressive capabilities, which even surpassed the technology that was to come soon afterwards with the actual airships that we all know from that period, or from the early 20th century. Something else that happened at this time, H.G. Wells, one of the world's first science fiction authors, publishes The War of the Worlds, which depicts an alien invasion of Earth. Something that I've seen is that a lot of the ideas that were swirling around the zeitgeist around this time, around the time of these conjunctions, seem to have played out in the world. And I think you could probably do a survey of the literature of that time and find the entire history of the 20th century and beyond kind of written in the ideas of the more imaginative artists of the time. So the War of the Worlds kind of anticipates the UFO phenomenon as well. So the long sextile of Pluto and Neptune, I mentioned that they're close to sextile now, but actually Pluto and Neptune have been in sextile for a very long time. They actually came into orb of sextile, so which is the first major aspect of their cycle after the conjunction in the 1940s. I've just highlighted 1947 here, so you can see this line here shows the two planets getting closer and closer to making exact sextiles. And this is from the Archetypal Explorer website, very useful, recommend checking it out for visualizations of astrological transits. This shows that these two planets have been kind of speaking to each other in the sextile for a very long time, since the 1940s. But there is a bit of shape to this sextile, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Now, in the 1940s, we see the emergence of the UFO phenomenon. So we saw how at the conjunctional period, we have a foreshadowing. We have the mystery airships. It's a much more, say, old-fashioned sort of rendering of the UFO phenomenon. But you can see that at a sort of archetypal level, it's not really very different. We have strange people flying around in flying machines and being able to do things that they shouldn't be able to do, etc. So we get to the 1940s and we have the sightings of what were called the Foo Fighters. During the Second World War, they were seen by both Axis and Allied pilots, strange, fast-moving lights in the sky. And then the flying saucer emerges. This is Kenneth Arnold, who was the pilot who probably made the first sighting that was then of what would later described as flying saucers, as the media described them. So the flying saucer craze really begins around 1947. That same year, of course, is the year of the Roswell incident, very famous. So July 1947, we have this incident where there's supposedly some kind of craft, something crashes in Roswell, New Mexico. We have this headline appearing: RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. So I think that the military actually gave a press conference saying that some flying saucer had crashed and then quickly recanted the story. And that's why this story's never really gone away. At the time of this this incident, you can see Pluto, 12 degrees of Leo. Neptune has got to 8 degrees of Libra. They are definitely within a sextile here, about four degrees off an exact sextile. That's well within orb. So at the same time, what's also going on in the 1940s? Okay, well, we have the development and then first use of nuclear weapons. And a lot of people, of course, have noted how strange it is that the UFO appears at the same time as the nuclear weapon and wondered, this surely can't be a coincidence. This is a clip from the US Department of Energy's History of the Manhattan Project. They have a interactive history of the Manhattan Project, which developed the nuclear bomb. And look at where they start their history. If you can see on this screen, they start their history in the 1890s, because this was when we first started to figure out the structure of the atom. The electron was discovered in the 1890s. I think it was 1897, if I'm not wrong. But at this same time, around the time as these conjunctions, very important conjunctions that happen every 500 years, we also have the mystery airships appearing, and we have the start of the scientific discoveries that eventually lead to the nuclear bomb. And this is from a timeline given by the Department of Energy itself. They say this science starts in the 1890s. So we see this confluence here. The astrology is kind of confirming that these themes are linked here. We have them all coming at the start of this cycle. And then in the 1940s, when the two planets then make their first aspect, we have the emergence of the UFO and the nuclear bomb. So going back to this long sextile that we've seen, we have this period here from the 1940s that I've ringed up to the late 80s, when the two planets were very close to exact sextiles. They were either making exact sextiles each year, or they'd separated a little bit, but they weren't very far from sextiles. So they were still well in orb. So these two planets are kind of speaking to each other here. And if you think about this period, this was almost precisely the period of the Cold War, when there was a huge nuclear threat. We had the threat of nuclear weapons hanging over us all. And it was also the UFO heyday, really. The UFO phenomenon kind of, I think, died a little bit in public consciousness in the early 2000s. But back in this time, it was kind of, it was all the rage, really. Now, then we have this period here that I've circled. This is where you can see that there's this deep dip. This is the two planets moving further away from each other. They're quite far from an exact sextile at this time. And what happens now? Well, the Cold War ends, the nuclear threat and the UFO phenomenon recede. So, with the end of the Cold War for quite some time, it felt like we weren't living under the threat of instant nuclear annihilation. And people weren't talking about UFOs so much. I wouldn't say that the phenomenon died a death, but I think in public consciousness, it did recede a lot. You can see a lot of stories in the mid to 2000s, 2010s of like, how come nobody ever gets abducted anymore? All this kind of thing. It seemed like the thing had gone away and that it was a relic of the past. But what's happening now? Well, this vertical line here, that's where we are today. And look, we can see that these planets are getting very close again to making exact sextiles. They're going to be doing that between 2026 and 2032. Every year they're going to make an exact sextile. So we're getting back into this time period that in terms of the relations between these planets and what they are bringing to the world, what they promised at their conjunction and then brought to the world when they were, or at least signified in the world when they were close to this major aspect, that they moved away and then they're getting close once again. And what's happening? The UFO phenomenon essentially is back, and the threat of nuclear war, it seems to be back. So, in my opinion, events on the ground are closely mirroring what this chart tells us should happen. Now, another factor that speaks to this, Saturn and Neptune, they're both in the sign of Pisces right now. So they're essentially already, depending on which astrologer you ask, they're already in conjunction. And they're going to get closer and closer to conjunction. So Saturn, we can think of Saturn as a planet of manifestation, Neptune as a planet of spirit. Obviously, they have a lot more to them, but these are very basic delineations. Manifestations of spirit with these conjunctions is one of the things that we seem to see. This is something I talked about in my recent video, which if you're watching this, you've probably seen, but I'm just going to go over it again very quickly. Previous Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, 1917. Now, I think it was 1918, Aleister Crowley, famous occultist, performs what was called the Amelantra working. Saturn and Neptune still very close to conjunct, and encounters this fellow who has been given the name Lam, which I think comes from Tibetan, meaning the way. But this being who obviously resembles the image of the grey alien that we've seen coming into. But this is back in 1917 when nobody has this image in their minds at all. 1917, also the year of the Fatima miracle, the miracle of the sun, when the sun is seen to sort of dance and all these rays of colors are sprayed all over this huge crowd of people, tons of witnesses. And that's something that really seeded popular culture, seeded the culture, the miracle of Fatima. A lot of people have heard of the three secrets of Fatima. That's what we tend to see at these conjunctions. We see events that then seed the culture somehow, that they start processes. This is the start of a cycle, the conjunction. Because somebody could say, well, aren't there UFO events every year? Yes, but the ones that I've highlighted here are sort of things that really set events off, set processes off, etc. So we get to the next set of Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, 1952 to 53. We have a huge UFO wave, a massive craze. We have these sources over Washington. This event happens then, which I mentioned earlier. We have the Air Force launching Project Blue Book, which is this project to investigate the phenomenon and document it. We have the first UFO contactees appearing, people like George Van Tassel, George Adamski, etc., meeting strange blonde-haired men from Venus, etc. All of this, the figure of the contactee then becomes a part of the culture over the cycle that these conjunctions here initiate. Then we've moved to 1989, We have the figure of Bob Lazar appearing, giving an interview to George Knapp, saying that he'd been working at a base near Area 51, and he'd been reverse engineering captured flying saucers. Um, it was Bob Lazar telling the truth. He's quite a controversial figure, I think, in ufology. I don't know the answer. A lot of people say no. There was a lot of fishy things about his story. He wasn't particularly well qualified, and it seems strange that they would put somebody like that onto the task of deconstructing flying saucers. But perhaps they had their reasons. Perhaps there was some sort of disinformation reasons for it. But he emerged, and that really seeded the obsession with Area 51 that we saw since. We also saw the Belgian UFO triangle wave, huge wave of sightings of triangular craft in Belgium. And in the Soviet Union, there was the Voronezh incident as well, which would have probably set off research in the Soviet Union as well. This is another famous UFO incident. So again, just Saturn Neptune conjunctions we see over and over again, kind of important events in the history of this phenomenon. I think that if we think about Pluto and Neptune as being the big cycle, the master cycle with the big promises that we can figure out from looking at the conjunctional period, late 19th century, Saturn hitting Pluto, Saturn conjoining Pluto, conjoining Neptune, sort of initiates then new sort of sub cycles. It brings things into manifestation, and kind of we get these shorter cycles, still quite long by the standards of a lot of the planets, that then unfold over time. And that's where we are now. We're at the time of another Saturn-Neptune conjunction. But careful, both of these planets, Saturn and Neptune, also have to do with deception. Okay, Saturn was called the Lord of Feigned Appearances by some astrologers in the Hellenistic tradition. Neptune is very much associated with delusion and illusion. So we have to be a bit careful of these things. If you go back to some of these events, there's the Bob Lazar story. Is it true or is it not? Are parts of it true and parts of it not? Same with people like George Adamski and these early contactees. It's hard to know, what's real and what isn't with these things, and they seem to have elements of truth and elements of falsity to them. So we have to be careful. And the other thing that I think is signifying these events is the Mars retrograde. So you may know Mars is currently slowing down to station retrograde. In a few days, it will be station retrograde, and then start moving the other way backwards through the zodiac. But Mars has really been slowing down to station for quite some time now, and it's going to retrograde back into Cancer early next year. So a Mars retrograde. This is a change in direction for the planet of war, the planet of conflict. It's a time when Mars things go a little bit haywire out of the ordinary. There can be events that force us to rethink the action that we were planning on taking. If Mars is the planet of action, the retrograde sort of things suddenly take a change in direction. We weren't expecting something to happen. We have to replan and deal with some new reality, is what we can often see with these. And as I've mentioned before, if we look at the US Sibley chart, one of the primary natal charts for the US, which I've got here on the right, you can see that Mars is going to be stationing right on the nodal axis of this chart. This is a very sensitive part of any chart. I think there are different schools of thought as to exactly what the nodes mean. I won't go into all of those now, but one thing to note is that this is happening in the 9th house, foreign affairs, among other things in a mundane chart. So we have the planet of conflict changing direction in the realm of foreign affairs for the USA. And I wondered if this was going to bring some big escalation or something like that in one or more of the conflicts that the US is involved in, even by proxy. And lo and behold, we have seen that, unfortunately, with this seemingly escalation in the conflict in Ukraine, but that's had all these knock-on effects, which are probably forcing some rethinks. And is it possible that one of those effects has been something completely unexpected? This was a quote from this video that I released not so long ago on the Trump victory. It was something I said at the end of the video. Pluto is in Aquarius now, and in this era, foreign affairs can mean something much, much weirder than what we're used to. And you have to wonder, with all these sightings of UFOs in the sky, or weird mystery drones, whatever they may be, at Air Force bases, potentially at nuclear sites, that this is what we're seeing. Um, it's kind of like Mars stationing. It's brought an escalation, which is also sort of it's kind of turned the tables, changed the game, so to speak, and potentially in the weirdest possible way. So what's going on? So just before we get to questions, I just want to consider some possibilities of like how to think about what we've seen, because as I've said, it's you've got to be very careful where this issue is concerned. Um, we shouldn't just jump to the assumption that this is aliens, or this is time travelers from the future sending us a message about nuclear weapons. That is, I think, in the realm of the possibilities, but it's only one possibility. We have to consider, could this be a load of internet froth, or potentially manipulated froth? But are these kind of videos not real? Are they showing things that can be explained in more mundane ways? Are people getting excited over nothing? It's not just internet froth, though, I think, because we've seen these stories in all these big media outlets about these so-called mystery drones, and that story seems pretty fishy to me. So I think the internet froth explanation is probably not where it's at. We're looking at something more real than that. Secret Russian weapons, we have to consider this, I think. Um, Here's a headline about the escalation in Ukraine that I mentioned earlier. Putin warns West as Russia hits Ukraine with new missile. And just a short excerpt from this story, I think it's from the BBC. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that an attack by his forces on the eastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro on Thursday morning was carried out using a new conventional intermediate range missile. He said that the missile, codenamed Oreshnik, was a response to the use by Ukraine of US and UK long-range weaponry to hit targets inside Russia. Putin added that Russia could attack military facilities of those countries which allowed their weapons to be used for this purpose. You have to consider the possibility that that's what we're seeing, that Russia is perhaps showing, look what we've got, we can do this with impunity. I don't know if we should definitely go in for that explanation, because these craft that are being seen at these sites, seemingly the US, the UK, they aren't able to do anything about them. So these are presumably not ordinary drones, if they are indeed drones of some kind. Does Russia have that kind of technology that the UK and the US can do nothing about? You can imagine how sensitive this must be if, given the stakes involved, given all the rhetoric about using nuclear weapons, if Russia is somehow able to, fly its craft over nuclear sites in the UK. I mean, it seems quite incredible, but we have to factor it as a possibility. I think, maybe they do have weapons that the US and the UK aren't able to do anything about. It's in the realm of possibility, clearly. And another possibility is just that some kind of psychological operation is underway. There's this book by this author called Serge Monast, Project Bluebeam, which outlined this quite outlandish scenario of a fake alien invasion. And Serge Monast mysteriously died quite soon after he published the book, which I think really deepened the excitement or interest in his theory. But in my opinion, if you read the details of his theory, it's it seems pretty far-fetched and ridiculous. But the idea of potentially faking some kind of alien threat, is that completely outlandish? I'm not so sure it is, to be honest. I think we also have to factor that, maybe not in the way that Serge Monast said, but we have to factor that in as, potentially within the realms of possibility that we're being manipulated somehow. I have this picture from Trump's attempted assassination here. I do personally believe, there were clearly forces that were keen to stop Trump, obviously, given this assassination attempt. And I don't quite believe the lone nut theory. You have to wonder, is there a possibility that they're pulling something else out of the bag right now? Again, it seems quite outlandish, but whatever the explanation for what's going on with the UFO phenomenon is, it's going to be outlandish. So we have to consider outlandish scenarios, and I think this is one of them. And so we have to be careful that we're not being manipulated here, and we'll see probably where this is leading soon enough. But I will point out Werner von Braun's warning to Carol Rosin. Werner von Braun, the former Nazi rocket scientist who was brought to the US through Project Paperclip and headed the US's rocket program. He worked closely with this woman, Carol Rosin, who claims that he, before he died, gave her a warning about what he thought let's say, the military-industrial complex might be planning. And he suggested that in order to further their goals of creating space-based total kind of control system using weapons, using powerful weapons, that this is what he believed that they were aiming for. And he warned Carol Rosin, and there were videos of her talking about this, that they would raise a few different threats, one after the other, in order to justify huge military spending and erecting this system. Firstly, it would be the threat of communists, then it would be the threat of terrorists, then it would be rogue nations, then it would be asteroids, and then it would be aliens. Now, I think we've seen all of those over the years, some more than others. Now, so if Carol Rosin is telling the truth, if Werner von Braun really did say that, then that is pretty interesting and worrying, because we are indeed seeing talk of a UAP, as they're now supposed to be called, threat. These are just some headlines I plucked from recent news stories. Watchdog says Pentagon's UAP response may pose threat to national security. Another one, are UAPs a threat to national security and US airspace? And then Pentagon Watchdog says uncoordinated approach to UAPs or UFOs could endanger national security. So there is this narrative that's being pushed by some people that UAPs or UFOs are a threat, supposedly in line with what von Braun warned about. And here I just want to raise some questions that I think we should be asking about this. Again, we want to be skeptical but open-minded, and I think we should be asking questions about this UAP threat narrative, so to speak. Is the UFO phenomenon a military issue, or is it a humanity issue? Should we be seeing this phenomenon, the visits of, say, if it is indeed real, visits of beings from other planets or from other realms or whatever, isn't that more of an issue for all of humanity rather than a military issue? I think it's a lot bigger than that. Another question, why is the phenomenon suddenly being portrayed as a threat when it was denied completely for so long? For a long time, the policy seemed to be to just completely deny that this thing was even real, to ridicule and mock and ignore people who claimed to have seen UFOs, etc. And then we've seen this sort of turnaround now. Suddenly, we have these figures who are sort of calling themselves whistleblowers, who are saying, "Oh no, this thing is very real, and it poses a threat to us." It seems strange that there would just be a quick switch with that. And then another question, I think, if they quote unquote were a threat, why would they wait so long before acting against us? Does it really make sense that the UFOs would be sort of visiting us with technology far in advance of what we've got from, say, the 1940s, but probably way before, uh, and allowing us to understand more and more about what they are, improve our own technology, get stronger technologically. Does it make sense that they would just let us do that? They would wait for us to get stronger and be able to defend ourselves if they were indeed a threat? I don't know. It doesn't make much sense to me. Maybe, but it seems a bit unlikely. And then, another question: is this a threat to us watching this, or is it a threat to the military-industrial complex? Are UFO visitations, say, if they are really showing up at nuclear sites, are they sending a message to, to the military-industrial complex itself, or to humanity? Are our interests the same? Not necessarily. And another question, of course, where do the financial interests lie? A new threat implies new budgets. Always follow the money. So I think I'm no expert on this subject, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't raise these questions, the ones that certainly occur to me. And then, of course, maybe these are what we're seeing is quote unquote aliens. We have to consider that, yeah, maybe this is something very strange happening. These aren't mystery drones, that they're some other kind of craft that are being described as mystery drones. That's also a possibility. And who might these aliens be? Well, the standard answer that everybody knows is extraterrestrials. They're beings from other planets, but there are plenty of other possibilities. What John Keel calls ultra terrestrials, so they could be beings from sort of parallel realms to ours, not necessarily other planets, but that realms that exist parallel to ours, and that they're able to somehow come in and out of ours. Could they be time travelers? There's some interesting theories out there that they may be beings, maybe human beings from the future. There's an academic called Michael Masters that has done some very interesting research on that, looking at how he thinks our facial features are likely to evolve going into the future, and he believes that we may well end up looking like the Greys if current trends continue. Could this be some sort of ancient and hidden civilization? Perhaps this technology was developed long ago by a civilization which hides itself somehow, maybe in the oceans, Antarctica, who knows? Could this be really just better described as a spiritual phenomenon? Or could this be a control system? This is Jacques Vallée's theory that the UFO phenomenon constitutes some sort of system designed to control human belief at the level of myth. So we have these visitations, people see these things, they're deliberately absurd experiences that the mainstream doesn't want to take seriously, but this seeds our imagination at a very deep level and thus guides civilization somehow. There are all sorts of possibilities, could also be all of the above. Now, one last thing, as an astrologer, you have to wonder, where is this going? And it's only going up, in my opinion. We've really only just seen the start of whatever this thing is. I showed you the chart for the sextile of Pluto and Neptune. That's going to be that sextile is going to be going exact from 2026 to 2032, starting to get very close next year. We have Saturn and Neptune. They're going to be very close to conjunct next year, exact conjunction in 2026. We're also going to have Uranus moving into Gemini next year. Uranus, the Promethean awakener planet, moving into the sign of Gemini, where this Pluto-Neptune cycle began. The curious sign of the twins. Those two planets, these powerful planets, are going to be in a trine, a very sort of harmonious, powerful aspect with each other, both in air signs. We're really just, I think, at the start of where this is going, and it's probably going to blow all of our minds, in my opinion. That's certainly what the astrology suggests to me. So almost there. Just want to mention, if you found this interesting, I gave another live stream on a slightly different aspect of this phenomenon quite recently. It was called Unraveling the New Age, UFOs, Fallen Angels, and the Coming Religion. You can find that on my members site. If you want to sign up, you can cancel at any time. But if you want to watch that lecture, I focused more on the spiritual aspect of the phenomenon and how what we may be seeing is the formation of a new religion around it. So you can find that on my website if you are interested. And I'm doing another stream later this month, uh, which will be my 2025 long form forecast on December the 21st. So if you want to join that stream, again, you can sign up as a member of World Astrology Report, or you can just book a ticket just for that stream on my site, worldastrologyreport.com/live streams. So if you've enjoyed this stream and you want more, then my 2025 forecast will hopefully give you some more juicy morsels on what's coming. All right. So let's just see where we are, and I'm going to pick out some questions. Just give me a moment. All right. First question here, Irina Pereira. Irina, thanks for your question. Do we know that these aren't government assets that aren't confirmed? Good question, Irina. No, we don't know that. And I can see you asked this question quite a lot earlier. So I hope I addressed that. We don't know that. And we need to be a bit careful about what theories we really go in for here, because if we go all in on it's aliens visiting us, that might not be what's really happening. It could be government assets, could be a variety of different governments. So yeah, we have to be very careful, Irina. I absolutely agree with you, the point you're making there. Okay, and Toph B says, any thoughts on Cliff High's December 3rd, 4th predictions of a melee between aliens and US forces? I have heard about that, yes. Well, what I will say is it seems to be quite in line with what's happening. Look at what we're seeing in the world right now. It seems very in line with that prediction. And it's also, I think, fits with a Mars retrograde, right? We've got this December 3rd, 4th prediction of a melee fight between aliens and US forces, whatever it is, some kind of fight in the sky. And we've got Mars stationing retrograde right now. We've got this sort of situation of kind of Mars intensifying in a way that then forces us to like change tack, rethink. What's going on wasn't what we thought it would be. I think it is. What he's predicted there is very in line with the astrology, essentially. I've outlined all these factors that I think back that up. So I wouldn't be too surprised to see something like that. Okay. Let me see what else we have here. Phase Beast says maybe those things are from the multiverse, since they seem to shapeshift the UAP and split into two. Yeah, for sure. I think that's absolutely a possibility we have to reckon with. The ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, as John Keel called it. They do seem to be able to move in and out of our reality, so to speak, change shape. We see them sort of dividing and all sorts of strange stuff. So yeah, I think it's a reasonable hypothesis of what they are, and very much possible. Amy Diaz Hollis says maybe these are interdimensional beings who figured out how to exploit quantum mechanics. Undoubtedly, there's no question. These are beings who've figured out how to exploit physics in some very very profound and skillful way. Could they be interdimensional? Sure, yes. They might be interdimensional. They might be from other planets. They could be from all sorts of places. But yes, they seem to understand physics at a level that we don't. Um, there's uh, a lot of noise in ufology, though, that that we're trying to catch them up, uh, perhaps by reverse engineering craft and so forth. There's all of that stuff. I'm quite on the fence with regards to all that stuff. I'm not on the fence at all that the phenomenon exists in some sense, um, and I'm not on the fence that it's going to be making itself known in the next few years in a much more obvious and profound way. Um, what it is, I am not sure. Uh, I also would like to shout out Gigi Young as well, the clairvoyant, working in the tradition of Rudolf Steiner. I like her work on this stuff. She has a lot of insights into the nature of the phenomenon that I think are worth checking out. So that is it for this stream today. I want to thank you all for joining me. And again, if you want to join for more streams, then you know where to go. I will be back on World Astrology Report pretty soon. And yeah, things are getting very interesting and very weird. But thanks for joining me along the way. I wish you all health and safety and happiness. So good day or good evening.